When You Grow Old and No One Is Left by Your Side. The heartfelt journey of Mark Thompson. There comes a time in every life when the noise of youth fades into silence. When children grow up and move away, friends pass on, and love becomes more memory than presence. For many, this moment arrives not as a dramatic crash, but as a quiet erosion, like sand slipping through fingers, grain by grain, until there's nothing left to hold. This is the story of Mark Thompson, a man who found himself standing at that very edge, alone, in a house once filled with laughter, now echoing with emptiness. But it's also a story of resilience, of rediscovery, and of learning to live fully even in the face of loss and loneliness. The house that once held everything. Mark Thompson turned 62 the previous spring. His hair was silvered at the temples, his shoulders slightly stooped from decades of carrying both literal and emotional weight, and his eyes, once sharp and alert behind rectangular glasses, had softened over the years, carrying the gentle sadness of someone who'd loved deeply and lost often. He lived in a modest home in a quiet Midwestern town, the kind where everyone knew your name, but no one knocked unless they had a reason. He had retired early after nearly 3 decades working for a government agency, a job he never considered glamorous but always respected. He wasn't rich, but he wasn't poor either. He had savings, a small pension, and the occasional Social Security check. Enough to get by, but not enough, he would soon learn, to keep loneliness at bay. His wife, and had passed away several years earlier after a long battle with cancer. Their children, Adam and Eva, were grown, married, and living states away. Adam had settled 2 hours north with his wife and 2 young boys. Eva had moved across the country for work and rarely made it back east anymore. And so Mark found himself alone, not just physically, but emotionally. The house that once buzzed with the sounds of homework being done, dinner being cooked, and music playing softly in the background was now still. Too still. The call that changed everything. It was on a late evening in October when Mark sat alone in the living room, staring blankly at the muted television. Outside, the wind howled against the windows, rattling them like a ghost trying to get in. Inside, the silence pressed down on him like a thick winter quilt. Then his phone rang. "Hey, Dad," came Adam's voice, tired and distracted. "Are you home tonight? I was going to swing by with Kate, but something came up at work. Think we'll have to reschedule." Mark nodded, though his son couldn't see him. "That's fine, son. Don't worry about me. I'm doing okay on my own." The lie tasted bitter. After hanging up, Mark let out a slow breath. He looked around the dimly lit room, at the armchair where and used to sit with her knitting, at the coffee table where they played Scrabble on rainy Sundays, at the framed photos on the wall capturing moments frozen in time. Suddenly, the silence felt unbearable. A neighbor's question that cut deep. The next day, Mark's neighbor, Mr. Lewis, dropped by. They were about the same age, though Mr. Lewis carried his years with more visible wear. His wife had died a few years ago too, and his kids lived far away. "You've got nobody else living here with you, right?" Mr. Lewis asked, sipping lukewarm coffee from a chipped mug. Mark simply nodded. "I know what it's like," Mr. Lewis continued. "This loneliness, it creeps in, doesn't it?" Mark didn't answer. He didn't need to. Then came the question that changed everything. "Mark, if the day comes when it's really just you, all alone, what will you do?" It was a simple question, but it hit Mark like a punch to the gut. What would he do? The plan begins to form. For days, that question echoed in Mark's mind. What if he fell ill? Who would call the doctor? Who would make sure he took his medicine? What if he broke a hip and lay helpless on the floor for hours? He began to imagine worst-case scenarios, each more terrifying than the last. And slowly, a realization dawned on him. He needed a plan. So he started preparing. 1. Financial preparedness. First, he reviewed his finances. He calculated his monthly expenses, rent, groceries, utilities, medications, and compared them to his income. He estimated potential medical costs and emergency situations. He set aside a portion of his savings into a separate account, earmarked for emergencies. Money couldn't buy companionship, but it could buy peace of mind. 2. Physical health and activity. Next, he realized he'd become sedentary since retiring. He spent most of his time sitting, watching TV, reading, or just staring out the window. That had to change. He bought a pair of comfortable walking shoes and started going to the local park every morning. At first, he only walked a mile. then 2. Eventually, he joined a community Tai Chi class. He met people. Some became acquaintances. A few became friends. 3. Emotional and social engagement. Loneliness, Mark learned, wasn't just about being alone. It was about feeling disconnected. So he forced himself to engage. He joined the local senior center. He played chess, bingo, and trivia games. He volunteered occasionally at a food bank. He reconnected with old coworkers via email. He even signed up for a book club. Each interaction, no matter how small, reminded him that he was still part of the world. Love finds him again. One evening at the community center, Mark met Linda Brown, a woman about his age, with warm eyes and a laugh that made him feel like smiling again. They talked, then talked some more. Soon, they were meeting for coffee, grocery shopping together, cooking meals, and taking walks along the river. Before long, Linda moved in with him. Not as a spouse, not as a caretaker, but as a companion, someone who understood the quiet ache of aging, who shared stories of past loves and lost dreams, who held his hand during the cold nights when memories hurt the most. Their relationship wasn't passionate or dramatic. It was steady, comforting, and real. Life changes again, but life has a way of pulling the rug out from under you just when you think you're safe. One afternoon, Linda received a call from her son, who was getting married and wanted her help settling things before the big day. She hesitated. She knew Mark depended on her. "I should go," she said finally. "Family is important." Mark tried to be strong. "Go," he told her. "You belong with your family." But the truth was, he wasn't okay. When she left, the house became silent again. The loneliness returned, heavier than before. Finding a new home. A few months later, Mark heard others at the community center talking about assisted living facilities. At first, the idea unsettled him. He associated such places with sadness, depression, and loss of independence. But then he thought, wouldn't it be better to live somewhere with people around me, where someone notices if I don't show up for breakfast, where I can play chess, eat meals with friends, and not feel like I'm fading away? He called his children. Adam sounded concerned. "Dad, are you sure? Won't it be depressing?" Mark took a deep breath. "I just need a place that's stable. If something happens, I don't want to be alone. You and Eva can't always be here." They agreed to support him. A new beginning. Mark moved into a peaceful assisted living facility outside the city. It had gardens, activity rooms, and staff who checked in on residents regularly. There were seniors his age, some sharp-witted, some forgetful, but all searching for connection in their own way. He met Mr. Vernon, a retired teacher who took him under his wing and introduced him to the others. He joined the morning Tai Chi group again. He played cards in the evenings. He even tried painting, something he hadn't done since college. And slowly, he began to feel content again. Tragedy strikes. Just when Mark thought he'd found peace, tragedy struck. Linda was involved in a car accident. Mark rushed to the hospital, heart pounding, tears blurring his vision. He arrived to find Adam and Eva waiting anxiously. The doctor delivered the news. Linda's injuries were severe. Her chances weren't good. Hours later, Mark stood by her bedside, holding her fragile hand. She opened her eyes, just barely, and whispered, "Mark, live well." Then her hand went limp. She was gone. Grief and healing. Grief hit Mark like a tidal wave. He withdrew. He stopped attending activities. He skipped meals. He stared at the ceiling for hours, replaying memories of Linda, her laughter, her warmth, the way she made tea just how he liked it. Adam and Eva visited more often. Even the grandkids came. They brought flowers, hugged him, and tried to cheer him up. But the numbness remained. Until one morning, he saw a new resident, an older man, clearly lost and scared. Mark approached him gently. "Hey, care to take a walk around the courtyard with me?" The man nodded silently. They walked without speaking, yet they understood each other. Later that night, Mark lay in bed, thinking of Linda. The pain was still there, but now, it was accompanied by gratitude. Gratitude for the time they had shared, for the warmth she had brought, for the lessons she had taught him. Lessons learned. As the weeks passed, Mark began to heal, not by forgetting, but by remembering. He realized that aging isn't about loss alone, it's about discovery, about learning how to live fully, even when the people you love are no longer beside you. He wrote down the lessons he'd learned. Don't wait until you're alone to prepare. Start planning financially, socially, and emotionally while you still have time. Stay active, mentally and physically. Movement keeps the body strong. Engagement keeps the soul alive. Build connections, even small ones. A smile, a conversation, a shared meal. These things matter more than you realize. Love doesn't end with death. It lives on in memory, in legacy, in the way you carry someone's kindness forward. Find purpose in every season of life. Whether it's volunteering, learning something new, or simply enjoying a sunrise, meaning can be found anywhere. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Independence is valuable, but interdependence is human. Live well, not perfectly, but intentionally. Because every day is a gift. Every breath is a miracle. A message to those aging alone. If you're reading this and you're growing older, perhaps alone, perhaps wondering what comes next, Mark wants you to know. You are not forgotten. You are not invisible. Your life still matters. Yes, the years may bring loss. Yes, people will leave. Yes, the house will grow quiet. But within that silence, there is still hope, still beauty, still joy, still love. Because the person who will always be there for you is you. And sometimes that's enough. Live well. In the end, Mark didn't write this story to warn you. He wrote it to encourage you. To remind you that aging alone doesn't mean aging without purpose. That even in the quietest moments, there is strength. That even in grief, there is healing. That even in solitude, there is peace. So wherever you are, whatever stage of life you're in, live well. Because that's the greatest tribute you can give to those you've loved. And to yourself. The final chapter, learning to live well. In the weeks following Linda's passing, Mark found himself slipping back into silence. Not the loud kind of silence that echoes through empty rooms, but a quieter, deeper one. The kind that lives inside you, in the spaces where memories and grief coexist. He no longer cried as often, but the ache remained, like an old scar that still stung when the weather changed. He moved through his days with a certain mechanical rhythm. Breakfast at 7:30, Tai Chi by the courtyard at 8:15, lunch with Mr. Vernon and a few others who had become familiar faces, then a quiet hour of reading or crossword puzzles before afternoon tea. But something had shifted. The world hadn't stopped turning because he was hurting. Life continued, not just for him, but for everyone around him. There were new residents arriving at the facility, some confused and scared, others curious and full of questions. There were staff members who smiled even when they were tired, volunteers who came in weekly to play piano in the common room, and grandchildren who visited their grandparents with wide eyes and laughter that echoed off the walls. Mark began to notice things he hadn't before. How the sunlight hit the garden just right in the early morning. How the scent of fresh coffee could feel like a hug on a cold day. How even the smallest act of kindness, a warm smile from a nurse, a shared joke over cards, could remind you that you were still part of the world. And slowly, he started to heal. Not by forgetting Linda, but by remembering her. By letting her presence live on in the way he treated others, in the stories he told, in the quiet moments when he would sit by the window and whisper, "Thank you." A new kind of love. One afternoon, while sitting outside in the courtyard, Mark met someone new. Mrs. Dolores Carter, a woman in her late 70s who had recently moved into the facility after falling at home and breaking her hip. She was sharp-witted, with silver hair neatly pulled back and eyes that missed nothing. She reminded Mark a little of, and not in looks, but in the way she carried herself, with grace and a touch of stubbornness. They struck up a conversation about books. She mentioned having been a librarian for most of her life, and Mark admitted that he used to love reading but hadn't picked up a novel in years. "You should start again," she said gently. "There's magic in stories. They help us remember who we are." That night, Mark dug out an old book from the bottom of his drawer, East of Eden by John Steinbeck, a gift from and on their 10th anniversary. He opened it carefully, the pages yellowed with age, and began to read. It wasn't easy at first. His concentration wavered, and his eyes tired quickly. But by the third night, he found himself getting lost in the story again, not just in the words, but in the memories they stirred. Reading became a ritual. Soon, Dolores joined him, and together they formed a small book club within the facility. Others trickled in, some just to listen, others to share their favorite passages. Through those evenings, Mark realized something important. Love doesn't end with death. It evolves. He didn't love Linda any less now that she was gone. If anything, he loved her more deeply, because he had learned what it meant to carry someone's spirit forward without clinging to the past, living with intention. As the seasons passed, Mark began to shift his focus, not away from loss, but toward intentional living. He started journaling again, something he hadn't done since college. At first, it was simple, recording the weather, noting which flowers bloomed in the garden each week, writing down funny things people said during meals. Then, gradually, he began to write about his life. About Anne, about Adam and Eva, about Linda, about the house that once held everything, about the loneliness that crept in like fog, and about the peace he was slowly finding. His writing wasn't polished. It wasn't meant to be published or shared. It was simply for him, a way to make sense of the journey he'd taken and to leave behind something real for those who came after. He also began volunteering, small things at first, like helping new residents find their way around or assisting in the dining hall. Later, he joined the facility's outreach program, visiting local schools to talk to students about aging, resilience, and the importance of listening to older generations. To his surprise, the kids loved hearing his stories. Some asked about World War II. Others wanted to know what music was like in the 60s. One girl asked if he ever felt lonely. He paused for a moment, then answered honestly. "Yes," he said, "sometimes I do. But I've learned that loneliness isn't the same thing as being alone. Sometimes, being alone is just being quiet enough to hear yourself think." The room went silent. Then applause. Later that evening, walking back to his room, Mark smiled. For the first time in a long time, he felt seen, finding purpose in every season. Mark often thought about the question Mr. Lewis had asked him all those months ago. If the day comes when it's really just you, all alone, what will you do? Now he had an answer. He would live. Not perfectly, not without sadness, but intentionally. He would wake up each morning and choose gratitude. He would take walks in the sun. He would drink his coffee slowly. He would call his children, even if only briefly. He would write letters to friends who lived far away. He would laugh with the nurses. He would cry when he needed to. He would remember. And above all, he would live well. Because that, he realized, was the best tribute he could give to everyone he had loved. Aging is not a sentence. It's a story. Mark knew that his time was limited. He didn't fear death, not anymore. What he feared was fading quietly, without anyone noticing. But now, he understood. You don't have to be famous or wealthy or young to matter. You matter when you hold someone's hand. You matter when you share your story. You matter when you offer comfort to someone else who's hurting. You matter when you choose to keep going, even when the road ahead feels uncertain. Aging, he realized, wasn't a sentence. It was a story worth telling, a story worth hearing, a story worth living, a letter to those who come after. Before the year ended, Mark sat down and wrote a letter. It wasn't addressed to anyone specific, not to Adam, not to Eva, not even to the grandkids. It was addressed to the future, to the younger generations who would one day grow old, to those who might find themselves standing where he once stood, alone, unsure, afraid. This is what he wrote. Dear reader, if you're reading this, it means you've made it this far. Congratulations. Life has brought you here, to this place, to this moment. You may be holding this letter in your hands because you're wondering what comes next. Maybe you've lost someone. Maybe you're feeling alone. Maybe you're looking for hope. Whatever brought you here, I want you to know. You are not forgotten. You are not invisible. Your life matters. I've walked the path you're on. I've known what it feels like to lose people you love, to watch your body change, to wonder if you still have a purpose. And I'm here to tell you, you do. Your presence in this world still counts. Your voice still matters. Your story is still unfolding. Don't let fear define your final chapters. Don't let loneliness steal your joy. Don't let the past keep you from embracing the present. Instead, take each day and live it, fully, bravely, kindly. Let go of what you can't control. Hold tight to what brings you peace. Speak your truth. Hug the people you love. Write your story. And above all, live well. Because that's the greatest gift you can give to yourself and to those who come after you. With warmth and hope. Mark Thompson. Epilogue, The Last Sunset. On a quiet Sunday evening, Mark sat outside with Dolores, watching the sky turn golden. I never thought I'd enjoy sunsets this much, he mused, sipping his tea. Dolores chuckled. Old age has a way of making you appreciate the little things. He nodded. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, just listening to the wind rustle through the trees. Then Mark turned to her and said softly, "You know, I used to be afraid of growing old." Dolores raised an eyebrow. "And now?" He smiled. "Now I know that growing old isn't about losing everything. It's about learning how to live with what remains." And in that moment, as the last light of the sun dipped below the horizon, Mark felt something he hadn't expected.